Thanks, Michelle, for that lovely introduction, and thanks everybody for taking your lunch break to listen to me share what little I know about AI. I would love to be able to say we've got all their problems solved. That's not what this particular presentation is about, unfortunately. So let me just share a screen here with you and walk you through some of the slides and the ideas that have shaped my thinking on AI. Now, it's obviously a fairly easy topic to think about. I started this out originally when asked what I wanted to present about, and this is this great quote from Wayne Gretzky, one of the great hockey players of all time. Essentially, skating to where the puck is going to be, not where it's been. And I think that's our issue with AI right at the moment, is we are basically fixated on where the puck is right now. Now, there are a lot of people thinking about where it's going and the future of AI and how to deal with it and how to use it, but I would say they are in the minority. Most people are busy using ChatGPT, or I would say even, broadly fighting the last war, so to speak, looking at the tools that we've got at the moment, thinking, how can we make them better with AI? How can we make cars run better or cities run better? How can we do integrate ChatGPT into our software, which is all, sort of nice nuts and bolts, interesting things. But ultimately, I'd say we need to be thinking much more into the future. So let's have a little bit of a think first, or talk about what AI is and what it isn't. So it will be transformational without a doubt. We know that much. What it is not is a black swan. Yes, it will change the society and possibly the species even as we know it, but it's not a black swan. It's not, we can see this coming, right? We know it's coming, and we need to be thinking about how we manage that. And one of the ways we manage black swans is with an all hazards approach. I'll come more of that in the future to think about that, what that looks like. But firstly, it will be possibly, hopefully beneficial, probably beneficial, but it's not guaranteed that it will be a beneficial outcome for any of us as individuals, nor if we want to take the big picture as a species or as the planet. So we do want it to be hopefully beneficial. It could be catastrophic, and catastrophic by this I mean terrible things could happen, but it's not an existential risk. You'll hear a lot of people talking about AI as being an existential risk. A lot of people actually said Y2K bug would be an existential risk. I think they were in the minority, but with AI, it's not. And I'll talk about why it's not an existential risk for us, if that's a bit of relief. It is something of a tipping point, but I'll argue that that tipping point is not simply a binary, yes, we've reached that point of no return and everything changes. The issue with AI is we don't know where that tipping point is. But first, let me have a talk to you about why I think that this is not an existential threat. For a couple of years, I worked in Africa, and I learned many things living and working in Africa for about 3 years. One of the things was about how Africans live and survive. This is a photograph I took on the way to the local markets. It's a middle-class home on the edge of Lake Tanganyika. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's in Tanzania. It is essentially 1,400 metres deep, and it forms part of the Rift Valley in Africa. The Rift Valley being the home of humankind, of Homo sapiens. And I say this as a middle-class company or middle-class home because they've got mud brick walls. So the lower class live in grass huts, and by that I mean literally grass walls, grass roofs, grass huts. And most of the people who worked with us in the camp we were at, which was a pretty remote area, lived most of their lives in grass huts. An upper class home in this part of the world had tin roofs. Now, I mention this because I ask you, frankly, have you ever seen a Terminator movie set in Africa? You don't. They're all set in Los Angeles or America, North America. Quite frankly, Africans living in Africa in grass huts are irrelevant to Skynet on a level in terms of, they're not irrelevant to us or to each other, but to the Skynet AI existential threat of destroying all humankind. Well, yes, possibly the United States and Russia and Western Europe might be a nice target for nuclear weapons. But honestly, if you've been in Africa or you've seen the place, the AI are not going to waste time and resources trying to take out Africa. It's a place that they can quite happily leave alone. So what does this mean to get around this existential threat? Well, we've had 5 major extinction events so far that we know of. The last one was basically about 75,000 years ago. This is a place near where I worked in Sumatra. This is a beautiful spot today, Lake Toba. It was the site of the largest explosion, we believe, in history, certainly in history that we can detect. It was a volcanic eruption which essentially created a volcanic winter for about 5 to 10 years and a 1,000-year ice age. Now, to give you an idea what that meant for human beings, that was a bottleneck. And when I say a bottleneck, some estimates range from around 5,000 to 10,000 Homo sapiens left alive. Some DNA records and mitochondrial DNA evidence suggests that we may have been down to as little as 40 breeding pairs. So that's 40 pairs of Homo sapiens, or if you take the upper end of that, 10,000 people. So that's the good news, that AI is probably not an existential threat to Homo sapiens. It just could take us 75,000 more years to recover. So I put that in the context of an existential threat. That doesn't mean bad things won't happen, but it does mean that our species is much more resilient than we think. So if you put this in another term, coming back to what I meant about tipping point and a curved slope, it's worth thinking about this. I'm paraphrasing a quote by Thomas Schelling, who was talking about nuclear war. But essentially, if I put this in our context, it's not a tipping point, it's not a cliff edge where we suddenly stand firmly and decide whether to go or not. We're actually on the slope, on a curved slope, and neither us standing on it nor an independent bystander, probably not even history, will be able to say at which point we hit the point of no return. We are well on the way there in practical terms, because we're not going to turn off AI. The genie is out of the bottle. We've opened Pandora's box, and if we don't do it, somebody else will, some other organisation or nation or somewhere. Even in history, if we stopped everything now, at some point in the future it's going to happen. So that's sort of the bad news side of this. We actually don't know when it becomes a real issue. Now, to put this in a risk management space, I'll give you an idea. This is a bit of risk modelling thinking from John Adams based on some earlier work, and essentially looking at these 4 paradigms of risk and saying, for number 1, nature is fairly benign. We can sort of move from side to side. Nothing terribly bad will happen. Life is ephemeral. In number 2, that we're on a balancing act. If we move a little to the left or right, and in this context, we could say to the right is good news, to the left is bad news. We are on that tipping point. And number 3 says, we can move within boundaries, but if we go too far, then things start to go wrong. And number 4, nature being capricious. So they're interesting risk models to think about. Number 4 is basically saying any imbalance, any little tilt. Now you can make your own mind up about which of these you think AI is. I think AI is essentially number 3, where we've got a huge amount of balance and tolerance. And on the good side, we go to a point where we become a new species, essentially integrated, a super species, or on the bad side where terrible things can happen and we don't need to go into the Skynet scenario and another 75,000 years to get back to electric cars and combustion engines. So if we look at this and think about it, there's a risk model that a couple of us have been working on. Miles Jakeman and Jason Brown and I have been building this as part of another book on risk, because there's not enough books on risk. So if you think about this model, on the left-hand side, we're talking about negative consequences. The right-hand side, we're talking about positive benefits. The idea being that likelihood, and this is a very simple matrix, but it's a good thinking tool. For most risks, we need to, and we usually do, focus on core risk mitigation from, if you like, the swans, the big events which are likely to happen. We spend a lot of time and energy trying to prevent World War III, as we did in the 50s, trying to prevent nuclear Armageddon. This is an area we need to spend time on in AI. Unfortunately, I would argue we're spending most of our time here, most of our resources, in fact, and our energy on the risk optimization. That's probably, in the scheme of things, should be number 2 when you think about benefits. And then number 3, the all hazards approach. So thinking about how we actually manage AI. And I won't get too much into this, but to give you a bit of an idea, there's a whole lot going on with things like ChatGPT, bringing AI out into the world. How can we make more money with it? How can we optimize everything, make more profit, improve the quality of life, and what have you. On the left-hand side, and I just picked a couple of instances there, I guess they all come back to Elon Musk, so that says something about either my thinking or his influence. Neuralink is that brain computer and chip implant, which is designed to help us manage the transition of AI to artificial superintelligence. And SpaceX is the all hazards. If it all goes wrong, then there's a plan B on Mars. Whether that's actually accurate and whether Neuralink is actually increasing or decreasing risk is probably a question mark. Everything comes together. But broadly speaking, I would say we are spending way too much time, way too much energy perhaps, collectively thinking about this area, thinking about how can AI benefit, which is a wonderful idea, not enough on these two sides. So what does this mean broadly? Just want to set the tone and understand where we are with AI. It took us 300,000 years to get to 8 billion people. Now, this graph starts to about the common period. This only goes back 2,000 years, 2,100 years from give or take. Basically, it's a flat line. If I showed you this on over 300,000 year scale, it would just be a single spike. If you go back 100 years, 1920, we were at about 2 billion people. 2020, and we are at 8 billion people already. And this is where 10 or 11 or 12 billion is where we're expected to stabilise before things start slowing down. Very, very long time to create exponential growth. Now, if I take that timeline and I shorten that just the last 100 years or so, this is what it looks like. So this is human population. So that's 20 trillion or 20,000 billion. So we're basically 8 billion here, 20 billion in theory. This is human population over the last 120 years. It's pretty much, it looks pretty flat. This is computing power. And because if I use the graph of how much computing power is on the planet, it actually just looks like a straight line going up. So this is slowed, that a version of it, which is computer performance in terms of computations per second per $1,000. So that's how much power can you buy for $1,000 in terms of computing power. And this is basically where we are at today. It's already outstripped the collective intelligence baked in the heads of Homo sapiens, of 8 billion Homo sapiens. If you multiply that by 100 IQ, this is what intelligence is looking like. And we are well on our way to already we have ChatGPT, which is tested out at an IQ test at about 150. It won't be long before it's testing over 200, and there are already systems out there which are testing well above 200 IQ. So what does it look like for us? At the moment, this is AI. We're building it, literally building it with hands and with software and all sorts of things, and we are at a point where we can say, this is what we want it to do and what we want it to look like, and it all derives from a combination of human ingenuity and resources and time. But what is AI really, and what are some of the furphies? So firstly, when we talk about intelligence, I don't know if you can think about, if you'd like to think for a moment, why is it that humans are the most intelligent species on the planet? And the answer quite simply is because we defined the word intelligence. That's it. Ultimately, we defined it, and we defined it to suit our purposes. Artificial intelligence is essentially, could be thought of in three phases. So narrow AI, which includes driverless cars, but it's been with us for years. It's as simple as optimizing elevators in a tall building to use less electricity. It's as complex as the Google AI, which runs their mainframe servers and optimizes server load and electrical supply and what have you to do that sort of work. But essentially, it's optimized to do one or two things: play chess, beat the world champion at Go, whatever it might be. General AI is essentially designed to be a piece of AI that can do whatever a human can do and can learn in much the same way a human does. And ChatGPT is starting to get to the boundary of that. Certainly its capabilities, it's been able to teach itself new languages, it's been able to learn all sorts of tasks which we weren't aware of. Interestingly, at the boundary point, there are capacities developing in AI which we don't even know about. So, for example, ChatGPT has basically passed the threshold for a teenager now for what they call an awareness of mind, if you like, or the the state of mind, understanding what a mind is. And so that, but when the researchers looked into it, they discovered that it had acquired this capability about 2 years previously. When they back tested it, had been growing this ability, and it's essentially the ability to understand other beings. What is a mind? What does someone else's mind look like? How do they work? So we don't know what capabilities are lurking, quite frankly, in the most common AIs, much less the complex ones such as ChatGPT. But we are very close to reaching artificial general intelligence, or AGI. And at that point, then we start to get into iterative. So if you can think about one human brain, which you can then replicate as many times as you want, you now have 10,000 of the smartest human equivalent brains working on artificial superintelligence. You have this process of iterative layers. It trains itself, it builds the next generation builds the next generation, and so forth. So some of the risks that are genuine, and you probably come across them already very briefly, we're looking at things like if you were to weaponize AI, so if you were to take a non-benign dictator, if you were to give North Korea the lead in artificial intelligence, and then it asked its AI, or the leadership there perhaps asked the AI of North Korea to iteratively grow, a 6-week gap turns into a 6-month gap, turns into a 6-year gap, and before you get to it, you're already way in advance of anybody else. So it's that little bit of a lead can make all the difference, and there is no predictability about how that will happen or where. ChatGPT, more or less, from a public point of view, came out of the blue. Its capabilities were based on a couple of simple algorithm changes. We don't even really know how it works. In fact, most AI is a bit of a black box. So artificial superintelligence is that point where we go from, okay, average human IQ is 100 IQ, 1,000 IQ, 10,000 IQ, an IQ of 1 billion is likely to happen in most of our lifetimes. And when? I'll give you the exact year. I'll give you what some people think is the exact year when that's likely to happen. And it's not far away. But I do want to also, I said AI is not an existential threat. And I also want to talk about consciousness. Because a lot of people will say, oh, well, AI will never become conscious, or AI will become conscious on this date. There are two things about consciousness. Firstly, it doesn't need to become conscious to ever represent a risk to us. It could be completely unconscious. It may never generate what we call consciousness. And again, consciousness is something that we defined. But the simple reason is that AI doesn't need to be conscious to be a catastrophic risk for us. It simply needs to, and I'll show you more about how that might look from an evolutionary point of view in a moment, it simply needs to have a system that benefits from doing things which we don't like. And again, the simple example, if everything goes well and we ask it to cure climate change and to slow down climate change, it may well decide that humans are the problem and it will get rid of humans. If we ask it to preserve human longevity, it may well put us all into deep freeze and stasis forever. But equally, even if we don't make a mistake on the good side of asking it to do good things for us, it's very possible that we will end up making a mistake which gives it too much power, so that simply in the process of evolving, that it causes us problems. Whether it's conscious or not is actually irrelevant. It's beside the point. And I will just add as a touch with consciousness before we get wrapped up on that, humans cannot definitively prove that we are conscious. So proving that a machine is conscious or not is beside the point, really, when you think about we can't prove that we're conscious. So, and by the way, I would just say that the only way that, we have some tests for consciousness, but we literally don't have a definitive way to prove it. Someone's not on mute there, by the way. If you could just mute, sorry. Thanks. So, the singularity. You may have heard of this. Singularity is a term coined by Ray Kurzweil, is probably the leading researcher in this. It's talking about the point where we can't detect the boundary between humans and machines. In fact, as some people describe it, a bit of a black hole, the threshold point where we cannot see beyond. And it's the blurring of life between biological life and intelligent life. It also leads to this point of exponential growth where we've already started to see, but quite frankly, we are at the bottom of the hockey stick. We think we have this growth, as I showed you on the previous chart, going like this. We're actually realistically about here. And I like to think that at some point when time travel is invented, there'll be a few places you'll go back to. I think Einstein will be a frequent visitor or being observed by time travelers, maybe the Sermon on the Mount, a few historic events, the Roman Empire. The early 21st century is the point where everything starts to change, where all the rules break, where we reach an exponential growth in intelligence, superseding human intelligence. And that may mean all sorts of things. It may well mean that, and probably will mean, that we have humans who are augmented, living with an extraordinary standard of intellect and access to wealth. AI, who are even far more advanced, and a whole lot of humans who choose to not augment and would rather live in the suburbs, oblivious to what's going on in the AI space, much the same way chimpanzees live in the forest of Tanzania now, oblivious to all that goes on with mortgages and global financial crises and all these sort of things. That may well be the reality of the future when we supersede human intelligence. There's a lot of implications: utopia, dystopia. The singularity has been around for 20 years. It's not a new book, but Ray Kurzweil's estimate is based on the calculations that he used, which are reasonable, and a lot of people tend to agree, that around 2025 we will have a computer which is capable of simulating human intelligence, and around 2045 is the point where that boundary, if you like, between biological and human intelligence falls. Creates a whole lot of ethical and philosophical questions. What rights do AI have? Can we plug them and unplug them? Do they have the right to vote? Are they citizens? How do we think of them? How do we define that? A whole other question for another presentation. But first, let me talk about the problem. And the real problem is the bandwidth problem. So AI could do all these amazing things. If you've used ChatGPT, you can already see how fast it can type and work through an idea. Frankly, it takes me longer to type out the question than it does for it to type out a 300-word answer to the question. The ability to absorb that knowledge at the moment, we're going through speakers, through keyboard inputs, voice input is just sort of, a little bit there. Not 100% happy with the voice dictation yet. But one of the things that we're working on is this idea of the brain-chip interface. If you think about it, I remember the first TV coming into the home. A lot of people remember the first computer coming into the home. There's a generation of kids now who don't remember ever having life at home without a computer. And there is a generation of people coming who will not remember getting their first chip implant. So if you just think about the implications of that, the always on, the chip behind your head, instant access to Wikipedia, all knowledge of the universe, all bus timetables, train timetables, the nature of the universe, material science, whatever you want. Now, one of the things that people like to say is, well, we'll solve the problem of AI taking control by we'll have a chip implant which will connect us to this always-on internet world. So we'll always be able to access AI, and essentially we'll all be on the internet all the time, and we'll be part of this huge brain. We'll have an IQ of 1 billion ourselves because we can access this and use it for our own purposes. And that's a really lovely idea. But I'm just going to put this to you for a moment and think about it. That is the equivalent of us taking a dozen flies and putting them on our shoulders and saying, I will dedicate my billion IQ, I will explain the universe to you, and I will devote my resources and my intelligence to helping you find fresh cow pads so that you can feed and reproduce. And that's on a scale of a 1 billion IQ to the IQ of 100 of an average human. That's about where we're talking as a human to a housefly. And the idea that this billion IQ brain is going to divert its energy and we are going to control it is like a housefly controlling us and telling us, right, okay, we're off to find a nice cow pat now, and we will obey and do that. So I think that's a little bit of a furphy, frankly, to think that we will control. At best, we might have access to the internet. We don't even know at the moment if our subconscious is controlling us. Most of our actions are autonomous: breathing, driving, all these sort of things. We say things which we later regret because our unconscious blurts them out. How will we even know if we're controlling the AI or the AI is controlling us? So think about that for a moment. I'll leave you with that. want to get into how evolution works, and we'll talk to the nitty-gritty of this, why it really matters. So we know the fight-flight process. We have basically 5 strategies as individuals. There's another model I've been working on, which it'll be in a book coming out next month, Future Uncertain. I call it Wayne hypothesis. So essentially it looks at this idea of these 2 axes. In humans, novelty seeking or risk taking is linked, correlated, perhaps not causal. It may be causal, but the research is not definitive yet. But a gene called DRD4, dopamine receptor D4, and the warrior gene or violence gene is MAOA. So there's some really strong links there about genetic influences. The fight or flight is about individual strategies, but genetic groups, evolutionary theory, there are only 4 strategies that we can use. And the first is the warrior, kill anybody not like me. Kill the other DNA, and I'll give you some examples. The adventurer is go and find new resources, novelty seeking, emigrate, go to the next valley. It's too difficult to find game here or not enough land for all of us. Go to the next valley, find something new. Nurturers protect everybody like me and my current resources. Empire builders, where you get a mix of adventurers and warriors, and they collectively descend on a new country like a colony, like Australia. You see this in warriors, you see the death squads in Rwanda, the Nazi genocide, Somalia, all these sort of things. If you think about AI, the equivalent of the warrior is it might divert, if it runs an electricity grid, it might divert the electricity to us. If it's a cybersecurity AI, it might actually, and when I say us, I mean us as in the AI being me, might stealing the electricity that for its own purposes. A cybersecurity bot might start attacking, preemptively taking out possible threats. It might develop and use autonomous weapons against humans or against other AI. It might simply devour resources from other AI grids. The adventure network is a different model where it thinks immigrants. Marco Polo was an adventurer. Australia is a nation of adventurers, people who were novelty seeking, risk taking, went looking for greener pastures, as versus nurturers who stay in one place, which the next slide will explain. In the AI model, it may well be scouring the internet for new data. It may be favouring novel data rather than reliable data, or maybe novel data for its own sake rather than data which actually serves a purpose. It may well replicate itself. For all we know, there's already AI that's replicated itself somewhere undetected. Probably not, but would we know? Quite frankly, we wouldn't until later on we realise that there's a virus on our computer, and actually, that virus is actually a AI segment. So detected or undetected, it may well start predicting where data will come and looking for new data, creating conditions for that data to evolve. Data that we hadn't even thought about. Data that humans with our IQ of 100, our limited brain set, wouldn't even recognise if we saw it staring us in the face. The nurturer model, and if you've ever been to Cinque Terre in Italy, it's the classic Italian family, and it's five villages, essentially cinque. So the 5 ports, and they are beautiful places. But when you go there, you'll also realise that they're basically tiny stone houses, little cobblestone streets, and they build the next generation on top. So every time there's another family born, these things are 4 stories high, right? So the youngest at the top and the oldest at the bottom, but every generation simply stays there. There's not I'm sure they have adventurers in their family. It's not like one family is always, every generation will be nurturers. They probably spin off different groups, but the adventurous ones take off. They emigrate to Australia or the UK or wherever. And if you think about other examples, you can use the same examples I gave for warriors recently, where in Rwanda, the Hutus killed off a lot of the Tutsis, and 800,000 people in 100 days died. And interestingly enough, working in Tanzania, and the next time I visited Rwanda as well, there is a large Tutsi population in Tanzania because in the 1990s and a few other issues, a huge wave of immigration. So a lot of people left, the adventurers left and went to Tanzania and survived and flourished. The ones who chose to stay, just as in the Nazi genocide of World War II, said, no, this is my land, I'm entitled to it, I'd rather die than leave my land, and sadly, millions did die. And we saw the same thing in Serbia, Croatia, all those sort of stories. It's a story frequently pitted warriors against nurturers. The nurturers who will normally protect their young, protect their land, but if you come in contact with that warrior strategy. Now, and Israel is the classic state of both warriors and nurturers, but saying my land is everything, I need to be here and nurture it. And if you think about an AI system, healthcare system that prioritizes patient well-being over new interventions or new technology, an AI system that produces a haven for legacy code and early AI and said, no, I'm not going to let you switch it off. I'm going to protect it and make sure it's safe. An AI that's tasked with managing a city's infrastructure might prioritize redundancy and duplication of services rather than bring on new services and systems. So all sorts of thinking can happen. They might look at potential threats and act preemptively to put barriers in place, whether those threats are significant or not, whether they're risk-based or not. And empire builders, we've all seen Roman Empire, British Empire, what have you. It's that process where you get enough. When the first sailors came out to Australia, they were adventurers. And then when enough people said, I'm looking for adventure, but I want to do it with a group, and they became the empire builders, the colonizers. And if you think about a business AI, which starts co-opting internal resources, then other AI builds digital marketplaces, acquires competing platforms, expands its influence, building and growing, dominating the space of resources, or a marketing AI, which starts assimilating other platforms and monopolizing channels, or indeed an entire AI space station, an orbiting space station. AI don't need oxygen, they don't need much other than electricity, they don't need water, they don't need much fuel, very little, but this could be a place where they build an empire of their own. So if you think about this sort of model and thinking, okay, so we've got this type of thing going on, our core risk management, we've got risk management optimizing and an all hazards approach. So what are we looking like? Okay. And just to set the scene here, we are realistically looking from 3,500 years, 5,500 years ago, written systems first start to appear, then a printing evolution, and then we're following this along. 1995, basically, Netscape Navigator gives us the World Wide Web. I mean, it existed in iterations before that, so I'm cherry picking my dates. Forgive me, but I'll make it. This would be a very complicated slide otherwise. With 2008, the iPhone, ChatGPT, 2022, 1 million users in a matter of days. This is where we are focusing, but our risk management thinking needs to be looking at the singularity. We need to be thinking of that 2045. The decisions we make today set us up for how well we as individuals, organizations or nations cope with AI. So to give you maybe not a bundle of risks so much, but something to think about, you might want to screenshot that slide. It'll be available later. I won't go through it again now, but essentially this is looking at the empire builders, so the warriors, the empire builders, the nurturers and the adventurers. And these are the genetic strategies which help species, including humans, get to where we are. And these are the same strategies that will determine which AI survive and evolve. And they're not a process of, if we design this or we do that, it's going to have certain things. No, it's quite simply a random AI, whether it is genetic, whether it's conscious or not. If it does these strategies, so for example, building an AI space station or co-opting others or going and looking for replicating itself to alternative environments, either covertly or overtly, any AI that throws out, it could be a bug, it could literally be a glitch, it could be something, an algorithm we don't understand, but if it does these behaviors, it gets more cycles per second, it gets more processing power, it will get more energy, more electricity, and so it will reproduce itself. So it's not about merit, it's not about values, much though I wish it was. We could say we could program AI to be kind to humans and to protect the planet. It doesn't really work that way, unfortunately. I'm going to leave you with a couple of solutions. Obviously, solutions are a good idea. So I've given you a couple of risks and a way to think about AI. And there is no simple solution, but I will just say, if you have a look at Nancy Levison's thinking, and it's around looking at how systems work. So to give you an example of what this means in the real world is, say, if we have a toaster, we know that a toaster by itself will just make us a nice breakfast. Add a toaster and a kettle, you've now got a cup of coffee and you've got a bit of toast. Now you make them connected, and then you connect them to your fridge, and you connect your fridge to the internet, and you connect your fridge and the internet to your electric vacuum cleaner and to the car downstairs and your self-driving car, and you know they can do certain things, like they can go and pick up, they can work out what you need in groceries because the fridge is empty, they can order it, they can send the car to pick it up. Great. wonderful idea, except that when you start adding more and more elements to the system with more and more capability, we very quickly get away from what we know the system can do. We get away from limitations, and with only a matter of a few degrees of extra complexity, we get into territory where we actually don't know what the limitations are. Your vacuum cleaner could decide to jump in the car and go down the supermarket, or it could knock over a pot plant because it felt like the pot plant was in the way, or whatever it might be. All sorts of things we don't know. So STAMP, which Nancy Leveson goes into in great detail in that book, Engineering a Safer World, looks at actually, rather than saying, okay, the toaster can only do this, the electric autonomous vacuum cleaner can only do this. It's like putting geotagging on a drone. So we restrict them from airspace. We say we don't want them flying over airports, and we geotag and we say that constraint is a fixed constraint. So that's one way of looking at AI, is how you actually limit it. There's a whole lot more to it than that, obviously, separate presentations around it, but thinking about it as a system, not as a single AI, not as a single idea, but as a system that interacts with everything in the world. Now, broadly, Mo Godat has written an interesting book, Scary Smart, and just to summarise a couple of his problems, the AI control problem is about building a superintelligence, which we know will come, a superintelligence of 1 billion or 1 trillion IQ, that will actually aid us and avoid causing us harm, deliberately or inadvertently. Now, we as humans make our decisions through our value systems, and I think this is part of how we have to define AI and build AI and support AI choices, whether it's what we buy or what we choose. It's as simple in many ways as saying, be kind to Siri, because if we start treating Chat GPT rudely, as we've seen with any number of chatbots that have taken on sort of the Twitter chatbot, which very quickly, and the Facebook one, which had to be shut down after a couple of days because it started to pick up a whole series of hate speech and radical views and just unpleasantness because of the way its users interacted with it and what it was picking up. So that's part of the problem. Our values will inform their values will inform how well we live or otherwise in the future. So that's it from me. I'm going to open it for questions now. If you'd like to contact me, that's my email address. I've got a whole lot of articles at juliantalbot.com. There's risk management software we build at sectara.com, and a great newsletter at srmbok.com. And yes, I've got 2 more books coming out in the very near future. So watch this space in the next month or so. So thank you.